Roger Waters officially left Pink Floyd, claiming he had been forced out by the remaining members. A bitter legal wrangle ensued as an air of uncertainty fell over the future of Floyd.
I harbour some bad feelings about Roger and about the procedure. Yes, I do. Wouldn't you? Sure. I mean, it's not something that I waste a lot of energy on, though. I don't have any desire to see him or talk to him or any of that stuff. But I'm not going to spend all my energy trying to fight him. No one is going to tell me that I'm not Pink Floyd and that we can't do Pink Floyd anymore. I mean, could you imagine it? I can't imagine it.
Nick Mason and David Gilmour, in a display of unity and defiance against Roger Waters' jibes and accusations, carried on under the name of Pink Floyd and produced their 13th studio album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Released in September 1987, the record, which featured Rick Wright on keyboards, offered a sound and style that was more recognizable to fans of classic Floyd.
It was inevitable that the record was going to sound more like a traditional Pink Floyd record because Roger Waters had gone. Now, that's not to denigrate Roger Waters' contribution to the uniqueness of the Pink Floyd sound, but we saw from the Wall onwards that Waters was moving in a quite different direction. Gilmore, for sound commercial reasons, if not sound artistic reasons, conceived this album as a return to the classic Pink Floyd sound.
It would be very easy to portray A Momentary Lapse of Reason as a Gilmore solo album under the Pink Floyd banner. Again, that's not something that it's possible to be concrete about, but it certainly has a lot more of Gilmore's style and influence, clearly because Waters isn't there. Gilmour was the driving force behind it.
On one level, there is a return to that sort of dreamscape Pink Floyd approach and the importance of the gargantuan guitar solo and atmosphere and menace and all that kind of stuff unfolding in slow motion. There is a return a bit to that. So all that theatrical aspect of Waters' approach with the vignettes and the linking sections and the overall arcing concept, that's been dropped, and a return to sort of slightly older school Floyd values. So on that level, yes, it does have something in common with a Pink Floyd record.
So that's the sound, but he really didn't have the material to sustain it, and that's where he misses Roger Waters.
Where Roger Waters appeared to be missed most was within the lyrics and subject matter. Although lead single Learning to Fly performed well in the charts, it lacked the depth and meaning of previous Floyd work. Not only were criticisms aimed at the collaborative efforts on the album, with Gilmour being joined by several writers, they were also directed towards the band's attempt to sound contemporary. With prog and classic rock having been pushed out of the spotlight, many questioned if Pink Floyd had a place in the 1980s music scene.
You know, the record sounds pretty hollow. They attempt to fill the vacuum with bombast, really. And so you'd imagine they would be anachronistic. And yet, of course, the album sells millions and there still clearly is a market out there for anything under the Pink Floyd brand.
To maintain the Pink Floyd brand, yet also compete commercially in a changing market, Gilmour's list of collaborators included previously out-of-favour producer Bob Ezrin.
Ezrin had obviously proved himself in the Pink Floyd camp by helping the Wall to be pulled together. So you can see precisely why Gilmour would want him back on board. But I think in the absence of a genuine, eccentric creative for Ezrin to work with, what we end up with is a slightly empty, super slick product. Because for all of Gilmour's qualities, he's not an auteur in the same way that Waters is. He's not a great lyric writer. He's not driven to write. And Waters would say this himself. Writers don't have a choice. When you're a creative writer, you just write. You don't say, today I'm going to write an album. Today I'm going to write a Pink Floyd album. And I think he recognized that Gilmour wasn't that kind of guy.
Without the influence and creativity of Waters, Gilmour, Mason and Ezrin struggled at first. When their initial attempts were deemed not good enough by the record company, writing collaborators such as Anthony Moore were brought in. This led to criticism regarding the validity of the album as a Pink Floyd record.
Gilmore had to recruit a bunch of professionals to help him make the record, which by definition means that it's becoming a diluted entity anyway.
I arrived at the studio and I know I had my soprano with me because that's on the recording, and I probably had my tenor and alto, and it was very loose. And I met Dave, and I met the producer, Bob Ezrin, and he said, well, yeah, get set up, get your instruments out, we'll play this music. The first track they played was Terminal Frost. He said, try soprano on it. And I think I tried soprano and alto. He said, just blow along with the whole track, and it's the instrumental track. And we both agreed that soprano sounded good with it, and so he said, well, let's do a take. Dave, to me, was very relaxed and calm, and just got his head into the music and was really nice to me. No problems with that. So from what I've read as well, I've never met Roger Waters, but what I can imagine was that between the two of them, Roger was the one with the angst and Dave was the one that was a lot calmer.
I mean, there's an argument to say that actually there hasn't been a Pink Floyd proper record since Animals. You know, The Wall and The Final Cut are clearly not Pink Floyd records in the old sense either. But Momentary, Lapse of Reason certainly isn't a Pink Floyd record. It's a Dave Gilmour record with a bunch of professionals trying to help him make a record that sounds a bit like a Pink Floyd record.
And Waters was quick to issue his thoughts on the new album. Having goaded his former bandmates during their acrimonious breakup, his public pronouncements on the record and its collaborative setup were predictably damning.
Roger Waters dismissed the album as a pretty fair forgery, and David Gilmour has since admitted, some years later on, that Nick Mason only really played on one track and that most of the keyboard parts were done by him and not Rick Wright. It's for the individual to decide whether or not Waters is right and that album is a forgery, but it certainly wasn't a collaborative Pink Floyd effort.
Nevertheless, with sales of over 9 million copies, A Momentary Lapse of Reason re-established Pink Floyd and proved that there was life after Waters.
I remember one particular night I'm playing in Cincinnati to about 2,000 people in a 6,000 seat, arena, and they're playing the next day to 60,000 people in the football stadium next door, playing all my songs, that was hard to take.
The viewpoint, I suspect, is that it's his work that we are getting all the publicity from, that's his viewpoint, is that he should be receiving, all these fans that are out there going to see us should be going to see him, and he feels very aggrieved that they don't understand that, and he said it publicly, that he wishes he'd done more publicity stuff and that people understood him. It was a very difficult period. You've sort of achieved all your childhood's rock and roll dreams. When you've reached that sort of pinnacle of Dark Side of the Moon, you have to really ask yourself what you're still in it for. And it was a tough time, but I think in the end I came to the conclusion that I was in it for the music more than for anything else. A conclusion which I haven't really changed. In that separation, we lost something and we gained something. But certainly, you always have some regrets about losing a talented person, don't you?
In 1993, it was an older, wiser and more relaxed Pink Floyd that returned to Gilmour's floating studio near Hampton Court to record what would be their last album to date, The Division Bell.
When it was time to make The Division Bell, Gilmour had a couple of years of massively successful world tour behind him. Also huge sales of the last Pink Floyd album. Not only that, but Roger Waters had agreed to allow Gilmore and Nick Mason and Rick Wright to carry on and be Pink Floyd. So they're starting the album with a completely different feeling.
The Division Bell was far more of a collaborative effort. It began with jamming sessions with Gilmore, Mason and Wright on Gilmore's houseboat studio, the Astoria, with other people like Guy Pratt, who'd been the touring bassist on the previous tour, just messing about trying to come up with tunes. And it's the first time that Rick Wright has a writing contribution on a Pink Floyd album for nearly 20 years, since Wish You Were Here in 1975. So that's a significant return to the fold for Rick Wright, and indicative of the fact that this was a Pink Floyd album and not a Gilmour solo project under another name.
Rick Wright has had an unexpected renaissance and makes a major contribution to this album. So suddenly Dave Gilmour has got somebody he can spark off again. It's not Roger Waters, but Rick Wright is almost back to the creative best that he had shown in the early 70s. There's suddenly a sense of Pink Floyd being a band again on this record, which was really lacking on the last record with Roger Waters and the first record without Roger Waters.
Although it is a collaborative effort, it's clear that at this stage Pink Floyd is being steered by David Gilmour, perhaps not as autocratically as Waters had steered it in the previous era, but nevertheless there is a band leader who is making the decisions and deciding the direction of the band.
I'm not really a control freak, I don't think, but I like things to be done properly, and I suppose in the end I become a bit of a perfectionist. I'm not, in many of the stages I'm not, but I become a bit of a perfectionist, and but I don't see myself as being a control freak in the way that other people, like my predecessor in this band, if you like, was.
As chief songwriter and the main driving force behind the band, Gilmour was forced to look within himself for lyrical and thematic inspiration in conceiving the Division Bell, a process that he had publicly admitted to finding very difficult.
From what we know of the writing process for the songs on the Division Bell, it's clear that Gilmour had certain things he wanted to say. He was prepared to talk about, in passing, his relationship with Roger Waters, his relationship with his new wife, the world at large.
The impetus behind this is that Gilmour had got married again. He was in a new relationship with Polly Sampson, who was a writer, a newspaper columnist, and she wrote lyrics for the album. And by his own admission, Gilmour had struggled in the past with lyrics. That's why he'd used outside lyric writers before. And she came along and delivered lyrics, which got the album moving.
Well, we started off, I went off to try and start writing lyrics to France, and my girlfriend Polly came with me, and she encouraged me. She kept telling me to keep working, sit in front of that word processor and bash away. But as these things do work, she got more and more involved, and I would say, listen to this, what do you think of this? And she'd say, well, that's crap, or that's good, and would come up with ideas herself, and gradually I had to face up to the fact that she was properly contributing and put it in some sort of proper order.
But of course that then opens up a whole other can of worms in terms of criticism of the record, the idea of some Yoko Ono figure meddling in the Pink Floyd, you know. So that of course was the downside to that. But there's no getting away from the fact that her involvement in that record got it moving.
Gilmour's lyrical collaboration with Polly Sampson, along with the Dream Academy's Nick Laird-Clowes, finally allowed the Floyd frontman to open up and express himself.